All right, dear listeners, how you been? I hope good. I'm doing good. I know a lot of people have been freaking out about the state of the world these days, and it's understandable. Though remember that you never know what's coming round the bend. Admittedly, it might be a disaster, but maybe not. Could be something else. So try not to get too anxious or depressed. And you know what really helps? Listening to a great conversation, and I got one for you today. My guest today is Matthew Connelly, professor of international and global history at Columbia University. Matt is especially important in my life because he's not only a tremendous historian and educator, he was also the single most important person in turning me into a historian. Notice I didn't even say arguably. There's no doubt, in my view, that Matt was the single most important person in turning me into a historian. This was back in the 90s. I was just a kid, maybe 22 years old, at the University of Michigan. He was a freshly minted PhD out of Yale in his first academic job. And I went to his office one day and I just said, hey, I think maybe I might enjoy going to graduate school in history. Do you have any advice? Man, oh man, I hit the jackpot. I didn't win the Powerball this week, but I hit the jackpot when I went to talk to Matt because, boy, oh boy, did he have an influence on my life. He took me under his wing. He taught me to read, to write, to think, to research like a historian. He taught me how to organize my research. Anybody who I went to grad school with will have heard about Filemaker, which is what, if you're out there, you're laughing now because you will have heard about Filemaker. And Matt taught me about Filemaker. We actually talk about that in our conversation. He's great at that sort of stuff. In any case, Matt basically taught me how to do countless things that I still pass along to my students all the time. And so anybody out there who may have been influenced by me in some positive way, you were certainly influenced by Matt Connelly as well. There is a direct line of influence there, I promise you. Of course, Matt's not just a great mentor. He's a great historian with books on the Algerian War for Independence, on the international history of population control. His most recent book, The Declassification Engine, What History Reveals About America's Top Secrets, is a really great one, which you should check out. Looks at the United States government's obsession with secrecy and the consequences that that has for us all. So Matt and I met up last November in New York City. We had a pretty tight window for our interview, so we really had to kind of knock it out in about an hour's time, which is less than I usually have with my guests. So this one is relatively short. And we mainly talk about Matt's trajectory as a historian. We don't get to the book. In fact, at one point I asked him if he wanted to talk about the book, and he just said, no, let's keep talking about what we're talking about because we were enjoying ourselves so much. You'll notice, we were really enjoying ourselves. We laugh a lot. And he tells some really great stories about he mentored me, but he's got his own stories of being mentored by important people at Cambridge University, at Columbia as an undergraduate. So, and I think, this is not the first time on this podcast that we've heard from an academic who was deeply influenced by a professor. And appropriately at the end, Matt gives a few thoughts on our current moment, this being current back in November, right after the election. And he talks about the continuing importance of the university and what we do in the university. And I couldn't agree more with him. So, there you go. As usual, please, like, subscribe, share this one. This is a great conversation, especially if you're an academic. You want to pass along the important stuff we do. Share this one. It's a good one. And I think you're going to enjoy it. So here it is. I hope you enjoy my talk with Matthew Connelly. Came back from the UK. What were you doing there?
Well, I've spent about a year, a bit more, as the director of the Center for the Study of Existential Risk. Yeah. So it's a center. It's been around a little over 10 years. It was founded by the Astronomer Royal, a philosopher, a guy named Hugh Price, and a billionaire named Jan Tallinn. And the three of them decided that people weren't paying enough attention to the potential for, truly catastrophic, even existential catastrophes. And what they decided was that they needed to both do research, but also find ways that they could make that research known in places where it could make a difference. So making connections to policymakers and the public.
Yeah. So like nuclear war and sorry, I got one thing.
The big ones are like nuclear war, pandemics, climate change, and lately AI. AI has been getting a lot of attention. Yeah, but we have people working on things like supervolcanoes, asteroid impact. There are a lot of things like that wouldn't necessarily be existential, but when you start to think about how, for example, COVID-19, like according to some definitions, COVID would not even count as what they call a global catastrophic event. Horrendous, yes, like 20 million dead, but, not something that we think is even close to something that would like stunt human civilization.
Yeah.
But, it's an example of how, even something at that scale could make us less resilient in facing everything else that's coming down the line.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, fascinating. So is that running out of Columbia, or is that?
No, it's at the University of Cambridge.
Oh, it is at Cambridge.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was on sabbatical from Columbia. And I was resuming work on a book, like a history of the end of the world. So as soon as I finished this history of secrecy, I thought, I heard there are centers out there. There are places where there are groups of people, like studying, the things that could do us in. And I'd heard about this place in Cambridge. I looked up the website and I saw that they had a job opening for a new director.
Wow.
Yeah. And the deadline was like 3 days away. And so I was like, maybe I'll throw my hat in the ring and see what happens. So that's how it happened.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Sorry, you might have said this at the beginning. I was trying to unplug the refrigerator. How long have you been doing that? When did you start doing
I started in July 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And you're enjoying that?
I have been enjoying it. It's, it's the most interesting job I've ever had.
Yeah.
It's something I can't continue doing, unfortunately. I've got to wind down, in January, and I'll be back at Columbia full time. But in the time I've been there, I've just learned so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Because I remember you wrote this big collaborative piece in the AHR with a bunch of people about like envisioning nuclear war or something or other, right? Yeah. It was like the history of the future, or predicting the future or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah. So it was part of this forum where there were a few different research articles. So I got together with some of my students and we wrote an article. It had a complicated title. The title was like, General, I have fought just as many nuclear wars as you have.
Right.
And it was a history. It was like the politics of Armageddon. It was about power struggles that ensue, when you're trying to plan and prepare for something that has never happened before. And so it was a history of how, like scientists, generals, people like clashed over, how they should think about nuclear war and how they should get ready for it.
And so was this the beginnings of your interest in the kind of thing that?
I was doing that with a bunch of students who took part in a program. It was called the Hertog Global Strategy Initiative. So I got a man named Roger Hertog to give money to Columbia so we could run this 4-year research program. And what we did was every summer, I would partner with somebody who was an expert on, say, nuclear war, or pandemics or climate change. And we would bring together a group of experts and they would workshop a problem. How do we develop a research agenda where if we had a bunch of, grad students, we could do some interesting work and discover some new things, whether it's about nuclear war or whatnot. And in that case, we spent a summer, I did this with a guy named Frank Gavin, and we led this group of really impressive students, and we ended up, like I said, publishing this research in an article. And then we did it like the next summer and the summer after that. So that's how I first started working on this problem. And one of the problems is that, if you want to study the history of nuclear war, and especially if it's about like nuclear war planning, like how they were planning to carry out nuclear attacks and so on, most of what you want to know is still secret. And so at that time, I started to hear about the way that lawyers, were beginning to work with data scientists because, lawyers also, deal with secrecy, right? A lot of what they want to know, when in the discovery process, maybe they get millions of documents from the other side. Well, a lot of those documents are redacted, right? And a lot of stuff gets withheld. And in a way, it's not so different from what historians deal with. Like when we want to study a subject, whether it's nuclear war or covert operations, the government isn't just going to hand us like everything we want to know. Like a lot of what we want to know is not released, maybe never will be. And so I realized that lawyers have the same kind of problem that we have. And I thought maybe we historians could do what they're doing. We could partner up with data scientists and we could start using machine learning algorithms to try to figure out what is it we don't know? Like what is it the government is not telling us? So that's how I ended up spending years actually doing this kind of methodology project.
Wow.
Like seeing we could come up with new methods when you have, on one hand, it's like too much information, like we have millions of declassified documents.
Right.
But on the other hand, we don't have the information we actually need, which is the stuff that's still secret. Yeah.
And you've always been fascinated by, you've never shied away from technology. So you're always interested in I remember you're the one who showed me how to use a proper database.
Filemaker.
Filemaker, yeah. That's right. And I saw that you're also on some sort of committee at Columbia or working group or something on AI. Is that right?
Yeah.
You're
so
the head of that? Or?
Right. I'm the vice dean for AI initiatives.
All right.
Yeah. So this is a job, I'm coming back to at Columbia. It's a new position. But like you said, I'm a historian, but, I've long felt that, historians should at least be open to the idea that we might be able to learn some things from other disciplines, especially when it comes to, what is like the very core of what we do. Like a lot of what we do is like trying to gather information and organize it, and then try to make out like patterns and anomalies in what we see. And also like think to ourselves, well, what aren't we seeing? Like, what is it that's not there? So yeah, even in grad school, my first job before I went to grad school was I was an editor at a newsletter, and we used this software called Filemaker, and that's how we manage our subscription, database. And so when I went to grad school, I thought, I still have this copy of Filemaker on my laptop, and I thought, like when I'm taking my notes, I'm reading in books and articles, and you know how it is, Isaac. Like in grad school, it can be overwhelming. Like,
totally.
Like when you prepare for your orals exam, you might have like a couple hundred books and articles, and you're reading this stuff through the day and night, and you're working at it for months at a time. And I don't have a great memory. So, so like what most people do, back in the day, if you did handwritten notes, you end up with like a whole stack of notebooks, So friends of mine, they would show me, it's like, well, here's my database. So they open a closet and there'd be like a stack.
Like legal pads.
Exactly. This stack of legal pads. I was like, well, what do you do with that? Because
it's not that useful.
Yeah, it's after a while, it's kind of, you forget what you wrote down, and then how do you find it, right? You don't really have a system. So I thought to myself, like, maybe I could use this database, because when you think of it, even like a word processing program, so like back then, we'd use like Microsoft Word or whatever. And lots of people would end up writing these long documents where they would like take all their notes. Like, let's say you did an orals field in a PhD program. Like, let's say your orals field is the history of the Cold War. So you got like 50, 75 books and articles. And so you just start taking notes. And maybe you have a new document for every book, but then maybe you decide to put a bunch of them in the same document. But you've always got the same problem, which is that a book, let's say it's like John Gaddis, like Origins of the Cold War or whatever, like he makes some argument about Walter Lefebvre, and he's picking a fight with Lefebvre, and maybe it's about like economic motivations for American foreign policy. Okay, so now what do you do? Because like you're taking your notes in your Gaddis document, and he's making points about Lefebvre, which is in your other document. And they're both of them writing about economic motivation. So like maybe you should have a subject document. And now what do you do? Oh, okay. Like you start copy pasting. But then at the end of this, after months at a time, you've got like 100, 200 documents.
totally,
Like, do you give them like different titles? Do you have some sort of code? Like, so it's hopeless, right? And it's even worse if you're trying to write like a research paper. So I thought to myself, like, well, is there software that has been designed to like organize information to make it like easy to like, like sort it and code it and like,
Seems like somebody could use
Has anybody
this.
thought of this before? It's like, and so, well, like there's actually database software. And so, I started like taking my Filemaker software and I like designed it. And this is one of the nice features. Like you could design it in any way you want. So
totally. I still use it.
You do?
I still use Filemaker. Totally. I've never switched. I just designed a bunch of different, versions of it for various projects.
Can I borrow your copy?
Yeah, sure. I'll send you the template.
It costs like hundreds of dollars now, right?
Not. You still can get the educator discount. You can buy it for it's like $200 or something.
Do you know? Like after I used to like you you were saying like how I sold you on this and like literally I would give talks. I would like people would say, hey, you're known as the guy like who knows how to organize like data. So I give these sort of methodology talks. I say you could use FileMaker. Yeah. And eventually I realized like, why am I even paying for this? Like I'm like selling this product. So I got in touch with Claris, the people. I was like, hey guys, like I'm like selling your product. You should give me a free copy. So they gave me a free copy.
At least your picture on the cover.
Yeah. But
I used to give that. I turned a bunch of other grad students on to FileMaker over the years, and then grad students who were my students.
All right.
And now I say, look, there's probably something better that's designed for this. I don't know because I don't really know. I haven't worried about it because I still use FileMaker. Here's what I do. Here's what's useful about it. Yeah. You want something that does this stuff, right? And here's the philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to share mine with you if you want to. My templates if you want them, if you want to pay for it. Yeah. But there's probably something better that you can just get out of the box. Yeah. But these are the keys, right? And it's just like you were saying, it's like being able to move stuff around, reorder it in terms of date and subject headings and all that stuff. Is just like, oh my God, I can't imagine writing a book, a dissertation without that. It's unbelievable.
I know. It's like, I think I was influenced by like my first job, even before, I was the editor of Microwave News.
Is that what it was called?
Yeah. Actually, I was only like an editor. I was the senior editor of VDT News. It's called VDT, which is like, it sounds like a sexually but it's Video Display Terminal News.
What is this?
It was like an example of how there is a publication for everything. Yeah. And it was my first job out of college.
Okay. Yeah.
I did it part-time when I was in my senior year. And then the guy who ran it, a guy named Louis Lesson, he ended up firing, I won't say a lot about Louis. He had some good qualities. All right. So I ended up taking the position of, the person who had gotten fired. I was still like in college. So but it was a publication about the health issues to do with working on computers. Oh, wow. So like repetitive strain injury, eye strain. And back in the day, the reason it started was that the same publisher, Louis Lesson, he published a newsletter called Microwave News. And Microwave News was about health issues to do with non-ionizing radiation from things like cell phones and power lines and terminals, And believe it or not, like, it's never gone away. Like there are still people like maybe RFK Jr., like who are convinced, you know, that these these Wi-Fi towers, or maybe your cell phone,
5G towers or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
anyway. This is in the 90s though for the audience.
This is like 1990.
Yeah. So this is before the internet.
Yeah. And there was a lot of interest. Like there was a profile in the New Yorker, so there was a lot more kind of going on. And there was like real research, like people were legitimately debating this stuff. But long before that, my very first job was like working in my dad's law office. And my dad was not very good at getting organized. Yeah. He had his own practice. So he did every kind of law. He did criminal law. He started out doing like civil rights law, and then he had to feed like 8 children. So then he started doing like everything. He did matrimonial and real estate, and his office was like like the Augean stables. It's like just files everywhere. And I remember like seeing him and feeling sorry for him because I would see how he would look for stuff. And he used to spend a lot of his time like just trying to find things.
Yeah.
And I saw that and I thought, I have that same kind of tendency. If you've ever seen my office, you'd probably say the same thing. But it made me think like, wow, if you're going to make your living like doing research and trying to gather that into things that you write to persuade people, then eventually you're going to have a lot of information.
Yeah.
And you got to spend at least a little time figuring out how you're going to find things.
Oh my God. It just makes it so much better too. I mean, I remember back in college, like, with the note card approach, where you write your notes on note cards and then at the end you're like ready to write your paper, you like lay them out on a table to try to, and I just remember that giving me such anxiety because it was so overwhelming.
Yeah.
So when you showed me Filemaker, I was like, this is the thing that can like get rid of that anxiety. I'll just have it. And then once you get into it, you start really geeking out about it. You're like, oh wow, I could do it this way and I could do that way. And it won't even be work anymore.
Right.
It'll just be fun,
Yeah.
So I get that. So you grew up in Long Island, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
I was like all of like 8 years old when I was like pressed into service.
Yeah. 7 siblings.
Yeah. 7 older siblings. So with me, it was, the first thing I knew how to do was to make a Xerox copy. So that's what I did. I'd be standing there for hours, and I was like barely tall enough to like press the button,
But you're helping your dad out.
Yeah. Yeah. All of us at one point would do that kind of thing.
That's cool. Yeah. It was his home office?
No, he had his own office. And, he was also, another way I identify with him is a bit of a workaholic.
Okay.
And he worked long hours. And, sometimes he would take me back to the office like at night. It was kind of sad actually, like having to hop in the car.
Yeah.
Like after dinner, like 8 or 9 at night. It's like, hey, I need some Xeroxing.
Oh man.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, I got to spend a lot of time with him and I learned a lot. That's, for example, the first time I heard about FOIA.
Oh.
Because my dad,
Freedom of Information Act.
he would sometimes use Freedom of Information Act like as part of his legal practice. He was also, like I said, he'd been a civil rights attorney.
Yeah.
Like he went to Mississippi for the voting rights drive, And so, so some of what I saw, also like how important it was, like the writing itself, like how big a part of his life, writing and trying to persuade people with words. Also like the way, I never really got to see much of him in action, like as a trial attorney, but I would hear about it. I'd hear about like his summations and I could see the way, he really sweated it out, like trying to, win these cases.
Yeah. And
by the time, I was a bit older and had more awareness of what he was actually doing. He was mainly doing personal injury law, like negligence, like from car accidents or like exploding batteries and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was high stakes because he would work for years on a case. And the typical case would be like a construction worker, like fell off some scaffolding and that family, like workers' comp would only go so far. So, they'd have kids and all the rest of it. And he was putting his own time and money into it. Like sometimes he'd spend $100,000, hiring experts and everything else. And it all came down, to the briefs that he wrote, his performance in front of a jury. And so I realized I never wanted to do that. Because to me, it was just watching it and seeing it, like kind of peripherally. To me, it was so stressful.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to college, I started like filing, financial aid forms. And I could see how there were years where he had like negative income. So there were years that he would win a big case, right?
Yeah.
Maybe just one, and it would pay for all the others. But I thought to myself, I like the kind of work, like I like the idea of, I like the research, I like the writing. I like that there are some stakes in this, like it matters. It would really matter to these like people he was working with.
Some service, right? Yeah.
But then I definitely don't want to worry about putting food on the table. Yeah. So.
Wow. So were you? So what did you? When did you have that realization? Like, was this like in your teens when you're starting to think about a career, or when would you have started to think about that?
When I was a teen, for some reason I got very interested in making money. Yeah, and I actually thought I would be a lawyer, but I wanted to be like a corporate lawyer. And at that time, though, in a weird way, like I started to get interested. I mean, I guess I was like when I was 16, 17, I started to like I always had a strange obsession with like kind of war. And I thought, the coolest job of all would be, to end up as like a national security advisor, Secretary of State, like something like that would be the ultimate. And I saw like at that age, even like I started to notice like what kind of people typically got those kind of jobs. And it's still the case, right? Like a lot of these people, they end up, coming out of these corporate law firms, or Washington law firms.
Right.
And so, when I was like 17, 18, 19, 20, that's what I wanted to do. I thought, I'm going to go, I'm going to try to get good enough grades. I can go to a good law school, work for a high powered firm, make some money, and, use that as a means to an end. And the end was going to be like trying to get, a career like in policymaking. Like I didn't think of myself as a politician, but I thought of myself as like the kind of person behind the scenes who could end up in a powerful job like that.
That's incredible. You were already thinking about that in like high school. Were all your siblings like that, or were you just sort of?
No, I was sort of known for it in that, they joke about me like reading the New York Times when I was like 12 or 13 or something. But I think I was actually reading Time magazine because that's what he had in his waiting room. Wow. But it's like they said the New York Times, like that sounded impressive.
No,
so
sure,
I let them say that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were just driven from early on.
Well, there are other times I had other ideas. Like, when I was really little, I wanted to do everything. I was like, I want to be an artist, an architect, and an army man, all kinds of stuff. But the first, when I started to realize I couldn't do all those things, one of the last things I gave up on was being an architect. Like, because I loved drawing. I was really into drawing.
Yeah.
But eventually, like when I realized like, well, you're going to have a career. And you could like start one way and end up doing something else, but you have to have like some sense of the trajectory that's going to get you there. And that's when I thought, okay, I'll be a lawyer, but I'll be the kind of lawyer who makes a bunch of money and has real power. Not like my dad.
So that's the idea. You're 17, 18. You go to college.
Right.
You're undergrad at Columbia?
I was, yeah.
Do I remember that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was like a little bit strange, my parents, like I was saying, not just my dad, but my mom as well. Like the two of them were very much like progressive. They would take me to, and everyone, my siblings and I, we would go to like, meetings of the migrant farm workers.
Yeah.
They would, like my dad, he got a little bit involved in Democratic politics. He used to run these like hopeless campaigns for like Democrats to be elected judge. Like good luck in Suffolk County, and it's like kind of a Don Quixote,
Yeah.
But I, the little snot that I was, I had to rebel, right? So what do you do? So if your parents are pretty progressive and your dad is like a bleeding heart liberal, what do? You
in
become
the 80s especially.
Yeah, in the 80s, right? Like we're talking about like 1984, 85, 86. You become Alex P. Keaton.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say.
Yes. I became like Alex Keaton. Yeah. I didn't like wear the tie or whatever.
Yeah.
But I love arguing with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was constantly like picking fights,
yeah.
Debating him about this and that. I was like so tiresome.
Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious.
And it must have been awful for him. Because he's
totally.
Like, how did this happen?
I know. What have I done? What did I do to deserve this?
And so, and I'll tell you, one time with my dad, I was at Columbia and I come home and the two of us, like we were having dinner at a diner or something. And I remember he asked me like what my plans were. Like, did I know what I wanted to do in life? And I told him like, I said, well, Dad, I want to be a lawyer like you, but I want to do like corporate lawyer or something like that. And my dad looked really like crestfallen.
Oh,
He looked disappointed in me. And it wasn't so much like I don't even know if I said I want to do corporate law, but I definitely said I want to be a lawyer. And I was surprised. And so I said, Dad, what's wrong? And he said, well, I was kind of hoping you inspired more than that. I said, really? Like, what do you have in mind? He said, well, I thought maybe you'd be a priest.
A priest?
Yes. I'd be a priest. And I was like, I hope I didn't laugh, but I was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, I think I joked with him. At that point, we could joke about stuff. I was like, but Dad, I'm not really like cut out for celibacy, right? Yeah. That's not going to work for me. And, but what I thought, and, I think I took this to heart. Like he was hoping I would do something that was going to have some social value.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like something like,
Yeah.
And at that time, I didn't think like trying to be a corporate lawyer as a means to an end to try to, do something, that would make a very big difference in the world. I didn't think that was a bad thing. Like I thought, from that age, I thought, I want to do the kind of work that is going to matter, right? That's going to make a difference in the world in some way, some important way. And if that's the case, like, why not do something that could have a huge impact, right? And I thought, like, maybe I'll end up like not doing the right thing, but I'd rather have the kind of life where, whether I did well or poorly, or, did things to make things better or not, it was going to matter, So that was the thing I cared about. So what changed though was, I was very into like, I was already at Columbia, which by the way was not even a super prestigious school then. Like I remember having lunch one time with my dad and this other lawyer out in Riverhead, like where they try cases. And it was right after I got my results, like from college applications. And I was telling them how, I got rejected from, Georgetown. I got rejected from Swarthmore. I got, I had a number of rejections, but I got into Columbia. And they almost fell out of their chairs. They're like, what? It's like, because back then Columbia was like number 18, in the old US news ranking.
Yeah.
And so, but I loved going to this Ivy League school. I loved the history, the prestige, and so I ended up applying for this program, the Oxbridge program, because I thought, what's more prestigious than that? I could go to like Oxford or Cambridge.
Right.
So Columbia, had a program where you could go for a year and you would be in residence, like every other student at one of these Oxford or Cambridge colleges. So ended up going to Cambridge. I spent a year in Girton College, which is one of the least prestigious colleges. Right? But they were the ones that were willing to take an American for a year. You know? And the way it works there is like you only do one subject. So I did history, and I just loved it. Like until then, at Columbia, you take a lot of like great books courses. I hadn't even taken a lot of history courses, but at Cambridge, like especially what they call supervisions, or at Oxford they call them tutorials. You meet one-on-one with a professor, and each week you're challenged to like write an essay on some like historiographical topic, and then you come back. And the old-fashioned way is like you read your essay, like you read it out loud.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then it's kind of stand and deliver. You have to kind of defend your ideas and so on. And I just loved it.
Yeah.
And it was also the first time that I ever like in any way felt that I could relate to my professor, because until then they always seemed like very remote figures. Like nobody in my life, in my family or friends or anybody else, I didn't know anybody who got a PhD. It never even occurred to me like that was something you could do. But I started to think about it, and people explained it to me like you could get a PhD and you could read history and write about it, and they would pay you. Yeah. I was like, wow, that's incredible. I was like, it seemed like, really?
Yeah.
So I started to think like, you know what? I still want to like go someday, like kind of work in policy. But I started to realize, like, especially because I'd done a summer at a law firm in New York, and I realized actually that could kind of suck.
Yeah.
I realized like just being a lawyer for money would suck.
Yeah.
So I started to think maybe I could use some other means to that end. And that's when I started thinking I would get a PhD.
Wow, that's great. Did you like history in high school? Did you know that you liked history, but you just hadn't really thought about it?
Yeah, I always loved history.
You always loved it?
Yeah, I read it even when I was a kid. I was a little bit strange in my taste, though. Well, maybe not that strange. I mean, I was really into war. So I read a lot of like military
That's not that
history.
unusual. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there a specific professor at Cambridge that was especially influential, or was it just that you got to take these classes?
Oh, yeah. There was this... I really liked this guy. He was a Catholic priest. He was a Jesuit. And I learned later, he was actually very well known as, first off, he was like the first like Catholic to be made a fellow at St. John's College. And, I learned early modern, I believe I did early modern English history with him. And I quite like the guy. And also he encouraged me at a time where it made a huge difference. So, I was an American. I, at that time anyway, England was really a much more foreign place at that point. So I felt a little bit fish out of water. And I didn't even know anything about these like supervisions and so on. And so, with my essays, like he really encouraged me. Like one thing, for example, we started out, sometimes it's not only one person. In fact, nowadays it's often like 3, 4, 5 people. But at this point, in my first supervision with him, there were 2 others. And so it was the 3 of us. And after that first meeting, he said, you know what, next time, why don't you just come back on your own? And I was like, oh, this is cool.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I started working like one-on-one. And then at the end of the term, you didn't get a grade, but instead the professor would write like a little paragraph, like evaluating your work. And there was one phrase that he used, like he was very complimentary. And he pointed out, like, it was surprising because he said, he's an American, so he hasn't actually studied the subject before, and he's never done, supervisions before. But my favorite part was at the end. He said, "Oh, but I shouldn't gild the lily," and I didn't even know what it meant.
Yeah.
So I had to go look it up. Like, what does that even mean, to gild the lily? And I was like, but it, like, as you can see, like, kind of stuck in my head.
Totally stuck in your head.
So it was sort of like being in a foreign place and getting that kind of encouragement from somebody who, like, I could tell, like, he was a real authority figure,
Yeah.
So it made me think, you know what, maybe I could do this.
Yeah. No, that's great. And so this was your sophomore year in
probably
college, or junior?
Junior year.
Junior year?
1988, 89.
Did you already have a major at Columbia when you went over there?
I think I did. Yeah, I had a major. And when I was at Columbia, like, again, because I was obsessed with military history, I took a bunch of stuff, anything to do with war.
Yeah.
So I take like political science classes. I took an economics class, like the war economy. And so I was like kind of doing this weird kind of multidisciplinary study of war. But I knew I was going to be a history major, and they took all these Cambridge credits as history majors. So it's as if I satisfied all the major requirements in that one year.
Right.
And then I came back and I graduated a semester early.
Wow, that's terrific. And so straight to graduate school from there?
No, remember I got microwave news.
Oh, okay,
yeah,
right.
VDT News. So I did that for a year and a half. I'll tell you what, again, lots of respect for Louis Lesson. He has great qualities and he's doing the right thing in a lot of ways, but I did not enjoy having a boss.
Yeah.
And I realized that, and maybe I never should have a boss. Maybe I'm just terrible that way. But I realized, like, I also love the fact that in academia, you don't have a boss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always love that too.
So I love that part.
Yeah, absolutely. So you go to, what did you say, 2 years in microwave news? And then
from when I graduated a semester early, then I spent that semester and another year. And then I went to grad school.
All right. So you go to Yale to do, did you know what kind of history you wanted to study when you went to Yale?
Yeah, I wanted to do military and diplomatic history. Yeah, and the person I wanted to study with was Paul Kennedy.
Oh, yeah?
Because to me, that was like the model. Because this was a guy, he was a historian's historian, right? He'd written a lot of really important books already, but then he wrote this like mega bestseller called The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. Yeah. And I thought, wow, he was having a big influence. That book was getting debated like all over the world because it came out around 86, 87. And by the time I got to Yale, this was like 91. And so it was the end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
And, the thing people remembered about that book was that, he had predicted based on the pattern of history, going back all the way to the Habsburgs, that the U.S. had entered this cycle of rise and fall. And like every other great empire before, like it came because we had overextended ourselves.
Yeah,
we were spending
imperial
too much
overstretch.
Exactly, yeah. And I didn't actually agree with him. I had like real problems with his argument, but the career itself was exactly the kind of career I wanted to have.
Yeah. So you start doing diplomatic history. The dissertation.
I did it on the Algerian War for Independence.
I remember.
Yeah. And that was because Kennedy had so many students that I ended up working with somebody else, a guy named Gaddis Smith. And Gaddis Smith was much more understated. He was somebody that did not publish nearly as much as Kennedy had, and definitely didn't have the influence that Kennedy did. But what was great about Gaddis was that he was a really good writer. And he also was great about giving me feedback on my writing. So like Kennedy, he'd read my stuff. He would encourage me. He was great to like kind of bounce ideas off. But the most typically you would get is he'd like put a check mark in the margin.
Oh, really?
I mean, sometimes there'd be some nice words at the end, but I could understand he had like 20 PhD students. It was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I would think I may have been only one of a handful of students, of Gaddis Smith, but he really like took time, worked with me. And one of the courses I took was a research seminar where he said that he wanted to make the focus that year. This was a seminar on U.S. diplomatic history. He wanted it to be about U.S. relations with the third world. Back then we would have said the third world or like newly independent countries. And I had just seen the Battle of Algiers, and I thought that film was so fascinating. And if you remember the plot, it pivots on what's called the Battle of New York, or at least I call it that, because Algerian diplomats were trying to win recognition at the UN as the legitimate representatives of the Algerian people. And this happened in the midst of the Battle of Algiers, this campaign of attacks, bombings. They were trying to kill informants. They carried out a number of attacks, including bombings of restaurants and bars and whatnot. And they were doing that to try to seize the attention, of the international media and international organizations. And it occurred to me that enough time had passed that probably a lot of the documents for that era had been declassified. And I wondered whether anybody had previously, written about that international history. And so that was like my first research paper in grad school. And it eventually became my dissertation topic.
And then your book. And that was, I don't know if you remember, that was when you hired me as a research assistant. And,
that book hadn't been
No, you
Wow.
were getting ready to publish it, and you wanted somebody to check your footnotes.
Oh, yeah.
So that was my job.
You know where the bodies are buried.
Yeah,
Isaac.
I know where the bodies are buried. No, but that was really a formative experience where I'm just going around the library looking up everything that I could. I didn't read French at the time, so I probably looked a few things up in French, but mainly all the English sources I went through, and that was my job in the graduate library at Michigan.
Well, I was very lucky because I had this like super talented, very bright, student like to do what I should have done, right? I mean, check all my footnotes. But I think like somebody else, they look at your notes, maybe they have fresh eyes, and they have a new perspective. Yeah.
I appreciate that, man. You were that professor. I'm sure you may not remember this, but I've told this story. I tell this to my students all the time. You were the professor for me that was like Gaddis Smith for you, which was that you were the first person when I was at Michigan, and I'd been there 5 years at this point. So I was doing graduate courses at that point in the School of Education. I wasn't in history, but in that program, I could take classes in other departments. So I took your class, which was, I think it was about ethnic conflict.
Race and ethnicity and international relations.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Can you believe they hired me to teach that course?
I think I don't think they would today, but you did a bang up job, and it was a fascinating course. And and then you, I think it was an independent study with you. I'm not sure how we worked it. That I would do this research paper, and so I wrote this research paper on the Mexico's aerial-borne herbicide eradication campaign in the 1970s. And nobody had really explained that before. There had been a couple articles by political scientists on why it maybe happened, but there were newly declassified documents, so this is a great thing. And I turned in the first draft of this thing to you, and when I got it back, it was so marked up in red, like every line had... And I had never gotten that attention in 5 years at Michigan. And in that one moment of attention that you gave the paper, at first it was kind of a shock. It was like, oh my God, right? But then I started reading and I was like, oh, all right. I learned so much about writing from that one thing.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
That was like totally turned me into somebody who was really interested in learning how to write well. And that's always been a major focus of mine with my teaching too. And that was totally your influence. I'd never gotten that kind of attention before.
Well, thank you, man. I feel like I've spent my whole career like trying to be a better writer. I feel like it's a vocation. You just have to work at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I totally learned that from you. And I'm always telling students that.
Right.
I may not always mention you by name, but I say I had this professor one time who tore up my paper, and I just realized, oh wow, okay, well this can. So one of the things I always tell them, and I've said this before on the podcast, one of the things you may think you're a bad writer, And right now you might not be a great writer, but you probably have no idea how hard it is to be a good writer, like how much hard work it is.
Right.
A lot of them just turn in that first draft.
Yeah.
And they think it should be done. It's like,
I have colleagues, like, I have to think, like, some of my colleagues, like maybe Mark Mazauer, Adam Tooze, like, when I see how much they publish, I think to myself, there's no way they could do what I do. Like, what I typically do is just draft after draft after draft, and I sometimes say that maybe I'm not a great writer, but I'm a good editor, and I edit my own work, and then I do it again and again and again and again. And I try to get it better, like every time. I think that's like, when I mentioned how I like drawing as a kid, the thing I really liked about drawing is, like, I typically, this is not what you should do if you want to be a real artist, but what I would often do is, like, there'd be a picture in a magazine and I wanted to make my drawing look like that. And so typically I'd be working like with pencil or charcoal or something. And I would like just keep at it, until it looked as much as possible like that thing I wanted to draw. And, I'd get my hands dirty, like I'd be using my thumb to like kind of do the shading and so on. And, in a way, I feel like writing, at least for me, feels that way. Like, I know what it should look like. Yeah. And it's not quite there yet. And so like I keep like, fussing with it and changing this and that and moving stuff around to make it look like how it's supposed to be. Yeah. Like, I don't necessarily know exactly how it's supposed to look, but I know what's wrong with it. Yeah. And what's not working. And then I just keep at it until I fix the more obvious problems, at least.
Sure, totally. No, and you, me at least, I read it out loud and I hear problems with the rhythm, and some word just seems out of place, and it's just draft after draft. I do the same thing, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that, like reading it out loud. I often, I have sometimes, I have really good students, and sometimes like some of your best students, they'll write these sentences, that are like just really long, and there's like just too much in there, and I sometimes write like just read this out loud and see whether it sounds good to you.
I do the exact same thing. I wonder if you did that to me back in the day, and that's why I do that. But I do the exact same thing. I say, read this out loud and see what it sounds like. Yeah. And you're going to hear that it does not sound good. Yeah. It doesn't work. Yeah. And plus, you're out of breath after the first third of it or whatever, right? Yeah. If you're out of breath after the first third, you've got problems. Yeah. All right. So I don't know what time do you got to go? About an hour would have been about 6:15. Yeah. So it's 5:58.
Wow. Okay.
All right. Yeah. So we got like 15, 17 minutes. So yeah.
And then I bolt.
And then you bolt. Yeah. Okay. You want to talk about it? Shall we talk about the new project? It's really up to you what you want to talk about with the limited time.
I'm enjoying this so much,
Yeah.
I like just talking.
Just talking. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
And about like, I haven't talked about any of this stuff with any interview before. Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay. So this was for the audience. This was at the University of Michigan. That was your first job. Mm-hmm. You were young as hell. You must have been maybe 30 or something.
28 or 29.
Yeah. You looked so young. Yeah.
I got so lucky, because I finished a PhD program in 6 years, and then I just started my first assistant professor job. I hadn't even finished the dissertation yet. Like, that was back when that was possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Things are so different. Yeah. Yeah. And you were replacing Bradford Perkins. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
The great
I remember,
Bradford Perkins.
Yeah, really. That was kind of interesting because I was told, you mentioned how the job I was hired for was race and ethnicity and international relations. And so this is one of 5 different multidisciplinary hires at Michigan. And what they were trying to do, they were all of them like organized under the rubric of this new, I think it was like the International Institute. Yeah. And what they were trying to do is like find ways to connect up different parts of the university. But what I realized like when I got there was like, they sent in like these shock troops, like all of us, like freshly minted PhDs. And we were supposed to get different parts of the university that had nothing to do with each other until then to kind of connect up and start talking to each other. And it was in a way unrealistic because, the history department where I had half my line, this was very much like a department that sensed itself being at the cutting edge, doing like cultural history or social history. And they looked at the public policy school where I had the other half of my line as like the kingdom of rational choice.
And the line, by the way, for the audience is half of his appointment. His
right, like
line.
half my appointment, was in the history department. Half was in this new policy school, which had never tenured anyone before. So they were also like just trying to decide, well, what should we recognize, as good work? Trying to develop this new school. And it was a school basically run by economists, political scientists, and socialists. So what am I saying?
Socialists.
Some of them too.
I knew it.
We knew it, right? Now I've given away the game. Sociologists. So the historians were very suspicious of them. Yeah. And, and I don't know how many people out there would be interested, but the kind of historians that were running the history department at the time, it's true. They had something called the Marxist Studies Group, MSG, and I realized when I got there, I hadn't read any of the work that they considered like cutting edge, important theoretical work. Like I'd never read Foucault, I'd never read like Derrida or Bourdieu or any of that stuff, And I found that was like the lingua franca in the history department, at least among the people running that department.
Right.
So I joined the Marxist Studies Group, and I was like a card-carrying member.
From Alex P. Keaton to Marxist Studies Group.
And, my politics had changed by that point, because after the end of the Cold War, I suddenly realized, it's a different world now, and we could look at things differently now. And so, and also like the experience of studying the Algerian War itself, was kind of formative for me.
Yeah.
But still, like I was not like progressive in the sense that, the way in which like people running the history department, we're talking about like Geoff Eley, Regina Moran Sanchez, people like that. I mean, there was to be honest, like there were some things that they believed everybody should know and everybody should agree on. And I was like kind of new and skeptical in a lot of ways about a lot of the things that they thought, should be obvious. And, I remember early on, I'm reading all this work, right? But then I began to think that a lot of this stuff is interesting. Some of it is potentially useful. I ended up like finding Foucault especially like quite important, in my work, especially when I started working on the history of population control. But then I thought like some of this other stuff, we're talking about like subaltern studies, for example. I mean, okay, there's some interesting ideas in there, like Ranajit Guha, Prose of Counterinsurgency, I think is fabulous. But some of this other stuff, it's just so poorly written.
Yeah, it's so hard to read.
It's just badly written.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, there are interesting ideas, but like I felt that in many cases, it was almost as if it was purposely obscure, where you had to like invest a lot of your time, just to learn the lingo, to figure out what they're talking about. And then some of what they're talking about is not that interesting, or it's not necessarily even very important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like they're banking on you, but like losing patience with the writing so you won't notice that it's actually not that interesting.
Or
it must be genius.
Like worse than that, it becomes this kind of like secret code.
Yeah.
Like members of like the secret society that like figure out, like Derrida, or figure out Gayatri Spivak, I'm sorry, colleague at Columbia. But the people who figure this stuff out, now they've invested so much of their time. They think it's important. I mean, imagine if they realize at the end of the day, actually, this stuff is not that useful.
Yeah.
Like there are some ideas here. Some of them are interesting. Some of them potentially useful. And I keep using that word useful because I'm a historian. Like I'm very practical in the sense that if I want to understand something, I will borrow from wherever. I whatever tools I need in my toolbox. You need the right tool for the job. It depends on what you're trying to understand. And some people don't feel that way. Like some people, they've committed an academic career to like developing theory, right? But they don't usually use the word theory in the way that I would. Like I think a theory is, the whole idea is like you explain a lot with a little, it's parsimonious,
right?
Okay. You've got tons of like evidence. It's complicated. You want to make sense of it. So you have a theory that suddenly allows you to see it in a new way, right? That's useful, right? So a good theory can be very useful. But a lot of the so-called theoretical work is useless. I mean, like literally useless for a lot of what I was trying to do anyway. And so that was a bit of a turnoff. But, I learned a lot, I learned a lot. Now, on the other hand, in the public policy school, like that was the kingdom of rational choice, right? And so a lot of the work that was, that people did there was informed by, certain idea about how you explain human behavior. And they really did use the concept of theory in the way most people do, which is that they had different theories about whether it was about international trade or labor economics or what have you. But then when they get to like talking about their work, their lingua franca was math, and it was usually with like statistics. Yeah. And if you talk to mathematicians, they would tell you like, actually, it's only like a handful of techniques. Like regressions, so a lot of the work ended up being almost in service to showing what they could do with statistics. You know, and that when they would give job talks, for example, a lot of times that's all they talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give you one example. Like I went to a talk, I remember it was about voters in Africa. I can't remember what countries they looked at, but it almost didn't matter because they didn't know the history of these places either. You know,
Right.
you know, like they had this data, and how did they get it? Like they'd hired these survey firms that would go out and like run surveys like in countries that these people had never been to.
Yeah.
You know, and then you try to ask them about like, well, how do we know whether to believe this data, right? Like, and in any case, like, wouldn't we expect that the way elections work, like in Nigeria, might be a little bit different than Cote d'Ivoire? You know, like they have really different histories and so on. And one of my colleagues there, I remember him saying, and he's a very impressive guy, guy named Bob Axelrod. Like he was literally a genius, right? Yeah. He won the MacArthur Genius Prize. But when I would talk to him about this, he'd say, you know what? Politics is politics. And it shouldn't matter, you know, whether you're trying to understand elections in Cote d'Ivoire or China, that in fact, if you want to understand like how voting works and how elections work, what we really want are theories that are, can be applied around the world, right? So he didn't believe in regional studies, or at least he thought that's not where the best people were doing the best work.
Yeah.
Right. And so his argument was that, well, the best people, if there are problems with the data, they don't work on those things. They work on those subjects where they have better data. Yeah.
Yeah.
So really different cultures, right?
Yeah,
like
totally.
very different cultures.
Yeah,
but it was an incredible education.
Yeah.
Being an assistant professor where my job was race and ethnicity and international relations. And my job is split, my appointment between these two like warring factions.
Yeah. Oh my God. Is that what made you, part of what made you want to leave is just that it wasn't a very good fit? Or did you just higher ambitions?
It was sort of like I didn't enjoy being a missionary. Like I actually felt like I was doing missionary work. I was like trying to explain to the Ford people. It became the Ford School of Public Policy. Yeah. Like trying to explain the value of history, like how that could be helpful. And then when I was in the history department, I felt like, I'm in a policy school, and I personally one of my primary commitments still, is doing academic work that I think actually can make a difference in the world. Yeah. And I just didn't see colleagues of mine who had that same commitment, at least not in the way I understood it. So to give you another example, again, this is about Geoff Eley. Uh-huh. So I remember there was a panel discussion early on when I arrived there, and it was about, if I remember, there was a book named, I think it was Hitler's Willing Executioners by a guy named Daniel Goldhagen. Mm-hmm. It was a very controversial book. And all the people, the people who did German history were really furious about this book. It wasn't just because they disagreed with it. It's because it was very popular. Like it was like a bestseller. And they were pissed off about that. Of course, yeah. So I remember like they held this like forum, this panel discussion about Hitler's Willing Executioners. And again, I hope I didn't get the name of the book wrong, but it was Goldhagen. And they didn't even invite the author. The whole discussion was like the Goldhagen problem. Like what do we do with this book? Right. We think it's terrible, but everybody's reading it. Yeah. And I remember like I got up in the audience. I said, there's a problem because like it's true. Like there isn't a big audience for serious academic history, right? Yeah. Now, how do we explain that? Because a lot of people like to read history, but they're not reading the history that we like and respect. Right. Okay. So couldn't it be part of the problem is that we're not doing our job as teachers? Like maybe there's a problem with how we're teaching them. Like if we're teaching them in a way where they're not interested in reading serious history, then maybe there's a problem with the way we're trying to communicate, like kind of the importance and significance of that work. Yeah. So, and Eley was like, it's not that. Yeah. In fact, the most popular course on campus was called, it was a history course called War and Society. And I remember there were people there who said, we don't like that course because there are too many people taking it. Yeah.
Wasn't that taught by like an adjunct too? Or somebody
John Marwell.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Interesting guy. Yeah.
Yeah, too popular.
It's too popular.
This is a piece of advice my brother gave me when I went on the job market. He said, you want your job talk to be interesting, but not so interesting that they think it's not serious.
Marwell, like his background, he was an English professor. Yeah. But he was adjunct faculty. He didn't have a tenure position. But he had to teach this course. What he did was he did some interesting things. He said, like the first day, he said, "Why are you here? Why are all of you so fascinated with war?"
Yeah.
So that to me was an example. You got to meet people where they are.
Totally.
Meet them where they are, and then bring them along. Yeah.
I totally agree with you. Now you don't have much time left, and which is a drag. There's a lot we could talk about. You've got 2 other great books. I haven't read your most recent books. I'm excited to hear about it too. But maybe you just talk about what you just to go with the tenor of what we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. What do you most like about what your career you've had here at Columbia for so many years now, and what do how has it really panned out for you given all this?
Well, I love Columbia. It's a sentimental favorite. Because I was an undergraduate here, so I walk around campus and I see the places where I almost got arrested. Places where I got into trouble of various kinds. And so already when I arrived there, I felt a little bit kind of at home. In a way, and I felt like I could connect with my students in a way I couldn't otherwise. But in contrast to what I was describing, Michigan's an incredible place, and the history department is amazing. Mm-hmm. And the Ford School is incredible, right? I mean, super brilliant people here. And I'm just talking about the things that I found challenging, right? Yeah. But it was challenging in a good way. It actually led me to work harder, think harder, and do better work, Yeah. And so not to cast any shade,
Sure.
on Michigan. And it's not that I left because, I was so unhappy. It's just because I had a senior colleague at Ford who said, you know what, they've never tenured anybody before, and they haven't even figured out yet how they're going to do it. They haven't decided what the standard's going to be. So he said, you should go out on the job market, and if you get an outside offer, that's the best way you can guarantee you'll get tenure here at Michigan. Yeah. So that's what I did. And it was an incredible year on the job market. Mm-hmm. There were so many jobs.
I remember.
People are going to hate hearing this, but there were jobs, at University of Washington, Duke University, Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Penn. I mean, there were jobs that they were in all different things, but because my book wasn't out yet, so I could pretend I was still a Europeanist. And I could sort of pretend I was also doing the history of U.S. foreign relations. Yeah. And I was even going for jobs, I could go for the job at the policy school at Duke and so on. So I was out there applying for all different kinds of jobs. And I ended up just getting a number of job offers. Yeah. It just kind of blew me away.
Well, you were in fighting shape.
It'll never happen again. Yeah. Not only am I much older and I'm not the man I was, right? But also the job market is obviously
of course. But so the first book wasn't out yet. Diplomatic Revolution wasn't out yet.
It wasn't out yet.
Oh, I didn't remember that because you were already. I remember your job talk at Harvard, and it was on the next book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they told me they wanted to be about the next book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then other places they said, oh, no. Talk about at Columbia, I gave a talk about the Algerian War.
Okay.
And so I gave different job talks to different places. And that was a little nerve wracking, but
man, you were jamming though, because that first book hadn't come out, and it seemed like you were well ahead already on what became.
You know what? I started working on that book my first year in grad school, so I had a big advantage.
I see.
So the whole time I was at Yale doing my PhD, I was working on that book.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I had a huge advantage that way. But at Columbia, so I ended up at Columbia, and one reason, again, this sentimental favorite. It's also where my family lives. Most of them still. And I just love New York, so it was great. I was back in New York City. A lot of my friends still lived in New York. But the thing I really loved about the Columbia History Department is that we have all kinds of people in the history department. And, there's no, kind of pressure to do some kind of work that somebody else is going to think is cutting edge or, whatever. There are people doing all kinds of history. Some of it is even a little bit old fashioned, but what people seem to care about is they just want it to be good. Yeah. You know what I mean? The idea was you should do good history.
Yeah. That's great.
And so Alan Brinkley was the chair of the department now. Yeah. Did super interesting political history, intellectual history, Eric Foner, another giant in the field, And and we had people doing kind of more theoretical, cutting edge, et cetera, but there was no pressure to do a particular kind of history. People just wanted you to do good history. Yeah. So that's something I've loved about Columbia.
Yeah. Yeah. You fit right in. All right. So you're almost out of time. You want to give a quick synopsis of your new book? Tell me what. Again, I haven't had a chance to read it. I just saw that it came out when I.
Well, Isaac, let me just say, you were an inspiration to me. You really were, because you early on, I knew that I would like teaching, but I never really had somebody. I felt You were the first one who showed any interest in like going on and getting a PhD in history. So you were still an undergrad at the time, but you were the first one I felt I could start talking to and trying to teach, like as a, somebody who's going to become an historian. And so, yeah, like I wrote a lot of stuff on your papers because they were already really interesting. Like not every student paper that I read ends up like with tons of comments because sometimes I don't find a lot to engage with, but you like had a certain spark and also I could see, you already like were kind of blossoming, you know what I mean? And so I just want to take my hat off and thank you. And also like, I was really proud. Like when you like applied to grad school, you got into Harvard, man.
I know.
In fact, people were fighting over you. You got into different departments, right?
Yeah. Well, but I got into Michigan, I got into Harvard.
Yeah.
And so that was, it was kind of a shock to me too, I have to say, because but like I said, I had potential, but I was so unformed when I started working with you, and you really like knocked me into shape. You really taught me how to be a professor, taught me how to be a student, taught me how to be a professor too, already at that early stage. So much of the stuff you showed me, just by your example, is the stuff I've taken on. All these things you've said about the kind of comments you read. So, that's one of the things I get out of a lot of these conversations is you talk to somebody who became a professor and you get a story about such and such professor at a certain moment, took an interest in me.
Right.
And that's one of my favorite parts of the job.
Yeah.
Is you see a student, a lot of times students, I often go out of my way to tell a student, hey, you've really got a good head for this. Like most students don't.
Right.
And you've got talent for this. And a lot of times their eyes kind of open up. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
They're like, 'cause they had no idea.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just like the same thing I say about the papers where they don't know how hard it is they don't know that that not every student has a brain for history. I didn't know that till I started teaching it. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, wow, yeah, some of these students cannot put stuff in order, right? And just cannot think in this way. Yeah. But some can. And so anyway, that was your example originally, man.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah. No, it's great. I wish we had more time.
I know. Well, let's do it again sometime.
Well, let's do a follow-up. Do you want to say something about your book real quick? Because it sounds fascinating.
I'd like to say something about this moment that we're in.
All right.
I don't know, people listening to this, what you make of it. Probably you already have some interest in history, but hopefully not everybody who hears this is like an academic, right? But even if you are an academic, like I feel like our work has never been more important. I feel such urgency now. Like, how I said, I wanted to do something I thought would make a difference and so on. There have been times in the course of my career where I think, is it really making a difference? Like I try to write books and I try to, do other things that I think might have some kind of impact. But, even when I was in Michigan, I remember we had, I had a colleague there, who'd been teaching this legendary course on U.S. history. But I remember somebody did the numbers and they realized this guy had 10,000 students.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that is just one thing we do. We teach, right? Yeah. And as you said, in some cases anyway, you actually can spark something, you can kind of lead somebody to think a different way. And, the last thing I'll leave you with is, how in this last election, the only votes that the Democratic nominee picked up were the votes of the college educated, right? And even more so people with graduate degrees. And a lot of those Democrats, and especially the ones of us working at universities, were hanging our heads, and we're thinking what's the point? But you know what? I think you could flip that and say, you know what? Maybe we had some influence on those students, maybe we actually educated them in some way,
right?
And I mean, I know it wasn't just us. Actually, the ones who end up in university, let's face it, they're typically the ones who paid attention in their classes, right? Yeah. The ones who did homework in grade school, right? And the ones who studied hard in high school. And I think what we should be doing now, instead of apologizing, for the ways we don't always measure up, and I agree with this, we should double down. What do we do that's totally unique in the world? It's definitely not the display of virtue, right? I think in that way, we've kind of lost our way. There are lots of charitable organizations and churches, synagogues, religious movements, that are all about trying to make people better than they are. Yeah. That's not necessarily what we're doing. Or it'd be good if we did. Yeah. But what we're trying to do is teach and discover things and create knowledge. Yeah. So we should be doubling down on the idea of academic excellence. Yeah. This is the thing that makes us different. And you know what? Maybe the rest of the country isn't where we want them to be yet, but we got to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
And we bring them along.
Yeah.
Okay. And so like, I don't think we should necessarily feel shame that like lots of college educated people voted to uphold the Constitution.
Yeah.
You know, lots of like people with graduate degrees, not just voted, but like they went out and organized, right? And try to convince their fellow citizens about the rule of law.
Yeah.
You know, and I think those are things like people may not necessarily understand because unfortunately not enough people study history, but you know, when you lose them, you're gonna realize how much worse things can be.
Oh my
like
God.
you think the last 10 years have been bad, you know, you just wait.
Yeah.
You know, and I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope I am, but it's too bad we're gonna have to learn some history the hard way.
Totally.
You know?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thought I'd leave you with.
Well, amen, man.
All right.
Amen. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
This has been fabulous.
Really fun.
This has been great.
All right.
All right. All right, there you go. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I sure enjoyed it. We had a lot of fun. We laughed and laughed and laughed. It was really great. I hadn't seen him in years. He's one of those people that you haven't seen in years and you get back together and it's just like you've been hanging out all that time. So it was really great, and we are hoping to do it again sometime. And maybe we'll talk a little more history. That is the kind of history that Matt's written about. He sure has a lot of interesting things to say. You should check out his stuff. All right. Well, I'll be back in about a month with another episode. That was the last one from my trip to New York. I got some coming up from London and from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam, and other places. So stay tuned. We'll be back in about a month. Make sure to share, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Get the word out. Check out the newsletter. There's fun stuff up there about cocaine and marijuana and drugs, man, drugs. All right. Until then, try to stay calm. All right. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.